On the evening of January 13th, 2020, children playing near a residential area in Coolock, North Dublin, came across a black Puma sports bag abandoned on the footpath. What they found inside would send shockwaves through Ireland and expose the brutal reality of a gang war that had been escalating for years. The bag contained human limbs, severed, deliberately packaged, and accompanied by a pair of flip-flops. Within hours, Garda launched one of the most intensive murder investigations in Irish criminal history. The remains belonged to 17-year-old Keane Mulready-Woods, a teenager from Drogheda who had vanished just 24 hours earlier. His death was not random. It was calculated, symbolic, and rooted in a cycle of revenge that stretched back years. This is the story of how a young life became collateral in Ireland's underworld, how investigators pieced together a crime designed to send a message, and how that message ultimately consumed the man who delivered it. Before we go deeper, subscribe if you love true crime documentaries, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. To understand what happened to Keane Mulready-Woods, you have to understand Drogheda, a town roughly 50 kilometers north of Dublin, straddling the River Boyne in County Louth. For decades, Drogheda was known as a working-class commuter town, a place where families worked hard and looked after their own. But by the late 2010s, it had become a flashpoint in Ireland's escalating drugs trade. Two rival gangs, both dealing in cocaine and cannabis, had carved the town into contested territories. Violence was no longer occasional, it was routine. Firebombings, shootings, and intimidation had become part of daily life for residents caught in the crossfire. The feud that would claim Keane's life is often called the Drogheda feud, though its roots are tangled and personal. On one side was a faction led by Owen Maguire, a well-known criminal figure with deep ties to the area. On the other was a loose alliance of rival dealers and enforcers, including one man whose name would become synonymous with brutality, Robbie Lawlor. Both sides used young people as foot soldiers, runners, and lookouts. For teenagers like Keane, the pull of quick money and status was powerful. The promise of designer clothes, respect, and a sense of belonging lured many into petty crime long before they understood the cost. Keane Mulready-Woods was born in Drogheda in 2002. He attended St. Oliver's Community College, a local secondary school where he was remembered as popular and well-liked. His family was working class, the kind of household that kept its head down and stayed out of trouble. Keane loved motocross. He owned his own scrambler bike and spent weekends racing through the countryside with friends. To those who knew him outside the criminal world, he was just a normal teenager. But Keane had another connection, one that would shape the final years of his life. He was the godson of Owen Maguire, a figure at the center of Drogheda's gang landscape. Maguire's influence extended across the town's drug networks, and his rivalry with other dealers had been simmering for years. By his mid-teens, Keane had been drawn into his godfather's orbit. It is unclear whether this was by choice, family pressure, or simply the gravitational pull of a world where money and power seemed within reach. What is certain is that Keane became involved in the feud. Court documents and Garda reports suggest he participated in low-level criminal activity on behalf of Maguire's faction. In one incident, he was accused of smashing the window of a rival's home and throwing a petrol bomb inside, a crude but dangerous act of intimidation. These were the kinds of tasks given to young associates, acts designed to instill fear without requiring the skills of a professional enforcer. For Keane, it may have felt like proving himself. In reality, it was marking him as a target. The turning point in the Drogheda feud came on July 5, 2018. Owen Maguire was at his home on Cement Road when a gunman approached and opened fire. Maguire was shot 6 times. One of the bullets lodged in his spine, leaving him permanently paralyzed from the waist down. The attack was brazen, carried out in daylight, and it sent a clear message: no one was untouchable. For years, the identity of the shooter remained a mystery. Garda suspected it was connected to the feud, but without witnesses willing to come forward, the case stalled. It was not until November 2022, more than 4 years later, and long after Keane's murder, that court documents finally revealed the name of the gunman, Robbie Lawlor. Lawlor was already well known to authorities. He had a lengthy criminal record, including convictions for violence and drug offenses. But by the late 2010s, he had evolved into something more dangerous, a contract killer. Lawlor was feared across Dublin's criminal underworld, not just for his willingness to kill, but for the cold efficiency with which he operated. He was methodical, ruthless, and seemingly indifferent to the consequences of his actions. His attempt on Owen Maguire's life escalated the feud to a new level of violence. Maguire survived, but his paralysis left him unable to retaliate directly. Instead, the conflict became a war of proxies, with younger associates and hired enforcers carrying out attacks on both sides. Keane, as Maguire's godson, was now deeply embedded in a world where loyalty was currency and betrayal was fatal. But there was another incident that would prove pivotal in understanding what happened to Keane. In December 2019, just weeks before Keane's murder, Robbie Lawlor visited a gym in Dublin. As he left, he was ambushed by a group of youths. They beat him, robbed him, and stole his gym bag, a humiliating attack that was recorded on video and shared widely on social media. For a man like Lawlor, whose reputation rested on fear and control, this was not just an assault, it was a public humiliation. Videos of the attack circulated online, mocking Ireland's most feared hitman. Some of the attackers later posted photos of themselves wearing Lawlor's flip-flops, a deliberate taunt designed to provoke him. There is no direct evidence linking Keane Mulready-Woods to the gym ambush. No court testimony, no confession, no witness statement has definitively placed him at the scene. But Robbie Lawlor believed Keane was involved. That belief, combined with Keane's connection to Owen Maguire, made him a target. In Lawlor's world, perception was reality. If he believed Keane had disrespected him, that was enough. On the evening of January 12, 2020, Keane Mulready-Woods left his family home in Drogheda. Before leaving, he had called his mother and asked her to leave money out for a taxi so he could return later that night. It was a detail that would haunt his family in the days to come, a sign that Keane expected to come home. He was met by Paul Crosby, a 26-year-old associate of Robbie Lawlor. Crosby was well known to Garda, with more than 40 previous convictions ranging from theft to violent disorder. Another man, Gerard Crowe, aged 49, acted as the driver. Crowe had his own criminal history and was trusted within Lawlor's circle. Together, they transported Keane to a house at 31 Rathmullen Park in Drogheda. The property was connected to Crosby, though it was not his registered address. It was a location known to local criminals, a place where business could be conducted away from prying eyes. What Keane expected to happen that night is unclear. Garda believe he may have thought he was attending a meeting, perhaps to discuss gang matters or settle a minor dispute. He had no reason to suspect he was walking into a trap. Robbie Lawlor was already inside the house, waiting. Investigators believe the initial plan was to rough Keane up, a beating designed to send a message, to reassert Lawlor's dominance and punish any perceived slight. But as the night progressed, the situation escalated. Once inside the house, Keane was overpowered. Multiple attackers meant he had no chance to defend himself or escape. According to evidence presented in court, Keane was beaten and tortured. The exact sequence of events remains partially obscured, as much of what happened was reconstructed from forensic evidence rather than witness testimony. What is known is that Robbie Lawlor delivered the fatal blow. He stabbed Keane in the neck with a knife, severing a major artery. Keane bled out on the floor of the house. He was 17 years old, but Lawlor did not stop there. What happened next transformed a murder into something that would shock even hardened detectives. Using a knife, Lawlor began to dismember Keane's body. He cut the teenager into pieces methodically, separating limbs from torso. This was not an attempt to hide the body, it was the opposite. Lawlor wanted Keane's remains to be found. He wanted them displayed. He placed the severed limbs into a black Puma sports bag, along with a pair of flip-flops, the same type stolen from him during the gym ambush. The symbolism was deliberate. This was revenge made visible. Keane's head and hands were separated and placed in the boot of a Volvo V40. The car was then set on fire in Trinity Terrace, Ballybor, in North Dublin. The fire was reported on January 13th. The The same day, the sports bag was discovered in Coolock. When firefighters extinguished the blaze and examined the wreckage, they found the charred remains of Keane's head and hands. The decision to burn these specific parts of the body was not random. Hands and head are the primary means of identification. By attempting to incinerate them, Lawlor may have been trying to delay identification or simply to further degrade Keane's remains as a final act of contempt. Garda were able to use dental records and DNA analysis to confirm the identity of the remains, though the process took several days. During that time, Keane's family was left in agonizing uncertainty. His sister had posted on social media the day after his disappearance, asking if anyone had seen him. She described him as a 17-year-old who had been missing since the previous evening. The post was shared widely. Friends and family searched the area, contacted hospitals, and tried desperately to reach his phone. But by the time they were looking for him, Keane was already dead. The discovery of the sports bag in Coolock sparked an immediate response from Garda. This was not a case of a missing teenager or a dispute gone wrong. This was a calculated, symbolic murder carried out by organized criminals. The presence of the flip-flops suggested a clear motive: revenge for the gym ambush. But it also suggested something deeper, a message being sent to rivals. The investigation was led by detectives from the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, working alongside local Garda in Drogheda and Dublin. They began by securing both crime scenes, the location where the sports bag was found and the site of the burned-out car. Forensic teams combed through both areas, collecting evidence that would later prove crucial in court. DNA recovered from the sports bag matched not only Keane's remains, but also trace evidence linking it to the house at Rathmullen Park. Investigators obtained warrants to search the property. Inside, they found blood spatter, cleaning materials, and other forensic indicators consistent with a violent assault and dismemberment. The house had been partially cleaned, but modern forensic techniques, including luminol testing and blood pattern analysis, revealed what had occurred. Garda also examined CCTV footage from across North Dublin and Drogheda. Cameras captured Gerard Crow's vehicle in the hours before and after Keane's disappearance. Traffic cameras, shop fronts, and residential security systems all contributed pieces of the puzzle. Investigators traced the movements of the car from Drogheda to Rathmullen Park, then to the locations where Keane's remains were disposed of. This was painstaking work, requiring analysts to review hundreds of hours of footage and cross-reference timestamps with phone data. Mobile phone records became another critical piece of evidence. Paul Crosby and Gerard Crow's phones showed they were in contact with each other and with other individuals in the hours surrounding Keane's murder. Cell tower data placed them near the crime scenes at key times. While no single piece of evidence was conclusive on its own, together they formed a coherent narrative. Garda also relied on informants within the criminal underworld. Gang feuds are notoriously difficult to investigate because witnesses are reluctant to come forward, fearing retaliation. But the brutality of Keane's murder had unsettled even seasoned criminals. Some began to cooperate with authorities, providing information about the movements and motivations of those involved. One of the challenges investigators faced was proving who had actually killed Keane. Robbie Lawlor was the prime suspect, but he was not immediately arrested. Garda needed time to build a case that would hold up in court, and they needed to identify everyone involved in luring, transporting, and disposing of Keane's body. It was clear that this was not a solo act. It required planning, coordination, and assistance from multiple individuals. As the investigation progressed, Garda focused on three key suspects: Paul Crosby, Gerard Crow, and Stephen Carberry. Crosby and Crow were believed to have lured Keane to the house where he was killed. Carberry, a 46-year-old with his own criminal history, was suspected of helping dispose of the body. Specifically, he was accused of transporting the sports bag containing Keane's limbs and setting fire to the Volvo containing his head and hands. Carberry was arrested and charged with the improper disposal of human remains and arson. Crosby and Crow were charged with more serious offenses, facilitating murder and impeding the investigation. While neither man was accused of physically killing Keane or dismembering his body, their roles in luring him to the house made them critical accomplices. Under Irish law, those who facilitate a murder by providing a location, transportation, or assistance can be prosecuted even if they did not commit the act themselves. The trials took place in the Special Criminal Court, a non-jury court in Ireland, used for cases involving organized crime and terrorism. The court was established to handle cases where intimidation of jurors is a concern. Given the nature of the Drogheda feud and the violent reputations of those involved, the Special Criminal Court was deemed necessary. During the proceedings, evidence was presented in meticulous detail. Forensic experts testified about blood patterns, DNA matches, and the methods used to dismember the body. CCTV analysts walked the court through hours of footage, showing the movements of vehicles and individuals. Phone data was presented to demonstrate coordination between the defendants. Paul Crosby and Gerard Crowe showed little remorse during the trial. Court observers noted that both men appeared relaxed, even smiling at times. When they were led away after sentencing, witnesses reported hearing one of them say, "We got off lightly." The comment reflected a grim reality. In the world of organized crime, lengthy sentences are expected. The fact that they received what they considered lenient terms was to them a victory. Paul Crosby was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Gerard Crowe received 7 years. Both had 6 months of their sentences suspended, meaning they would serve less time if they complied with conditions upon release. Due to remission rules in the Irish prison system, which allow prisoners to reduce their sentences through good behavior, Crosby could be released in 7.5 years, and Crowe in 5. For Keane's family, these sentences felt inadequate. A 17-year-old had been murdered, dismembered, and discarded like refuse. Yet the men who facilitated his death would be free within a decade. Stephen Carberry faced separate charges related to the disposal of Keane's remains. The trial was still ongoing at the time of reporting, with Garda hopeful of securing additional convictions. The investigation into others who may have assisted in the crime remained active. Detectives believed more individuals had knowledge of what happened, but proving their involvement in court was a different matter. Robbie Lawlor, the man believed to have killed Keane, would never face trial. On April 4, 2020, just 3 months after Keane's murder, Lawlor was shot dead in broad daylight in Belfast, Northern Ireland. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The assassination was swift and professional, carried out in a public area with multiple witnesses. Lawlor had travelled to Belfast under the belief he was being hired for a contract killing. It was, in fact, a trap. According to reports from the Irish Mirror and other sources, Cornelius Price, a high-ranking figure in the Drogheda gang scene, orchestrated Lawlor's death. Price had allegedly paid over €100,000 to have Lawlor lured to Belfast and killed. The motive was personal and strategic. Price had known Keane's father socially. Though Price himself was a career criminal with his own violent history, the brutality of Keane's murder had crossed a line. Dismemberment, public display, the involvement of a teenager. These were seen as violations of unwritten rules even within the criminal underworld. But Price also had pragmatic reasons for wanting Lawlor dead. Lawlor had blamed Price for the killing of his brother-in-law in Bettystown and had vowed revenge. Price knew that as long as Lawlor was alive, he and his family were in danger. In the months following Keane's murder, Price had moved his immediate family from their home near Gormanston, County Meath, to Rochdale outside Manchester, where they would be safer from retaliation. Meanwhile, Price worked with contacts in Mountjoy Prison to arrange the fake contract killing in Belfast. The plan took weeks to set up, involving intermediaries and trusted associates who could convince Lawlor the job was legitimate. Lawlor's assassination in Belfast was not just a personal act of revenge, it was a message. The feud that had claimed Keane's life, paralyzed Owen Maguire, and terrorized Drogheda was spiraling out of control. Each killing prompted another, each act of violence demanding a response. Hours after Lawlor's death, Cornelius Price posted a video on social media. In it, he raised a glass of Captain Morgan rum and toasted Lawlor's death, saying, "Cheers to Robbie Lawlor, boys. Rest in peace. He's not even worthy of rest in peace, but fair play today." The video was viewed thousands of times before being taken down. It was a brazen display, evidence of Price's involvement that could have been used against him in court. But Price was confident. He had distanced himself physically from the crime, and the assassination had taken place in Northern Ireland, complicating jurisdictional issues for Irish authorities. 3 men were eventually charged in connection with Lawlor's murder: Tia Adrian Holland, James Fields, and a third unnamed individual. Holland and another defendant were charged with murder and denied the allegations. Fields was charged with assisting offenders. As of the time of reporting, the case remained before Belfast Crown Court, with the investigation still active. Cornelius Price would never face trial for his role in Lawlor's death. In early 2024, Price died from a brain disease. He was in his 40s. His death marked the end of a criminal career that had spanned decades and left a trail of violence across Ireland. A Garda source, speaking anonymously to reporters, described Price as "no angel," but acknowledged that his orchestration of Lawlor's assassination had removed one of Ireland's most dangerous criminals. "He probably did the world a favor," the source said. "Lawlor was a madman who killed for fun." The legacy of Keane Mulready-Woods' murder extends far beyond the individuals directly involved. It exposed the mechanisms of gang violence in Ireland, how young people are recruited, how feuds escalate, and how brutality becomes a currency in a world governed by fear and reputation. Keane's death also sparked a national conversation about youth involvement in organized crime. Politicians, community leaders, and child welfare advocates called for greater intervention to prevent teenagers from being drawn into criminal networks. But the reality is complex. In areas like Drogheda, where opportunities are limited and social services overstretched, the allure of quick money and status remains powerful. For many young people, gangs offer what mainstream society does not: belonging, respect, and a sense of purpose. The flip side is violence, imprisonment, and early death. Keane's family was left to mourn a son, a brother, a grandson whose life was cut short before it had truly begun. His mother, his sister, and others who loved him had to endure not only his loss, but the horrific circumstances of his death. The public nature of the crime, the discovery of his remains by children, the media coverage, the trial proceedings, meant that their grief was played out in the national spotlight. There was no privacy, no quiet space to process what had happened. The Garda investigation into Keane's murder demonstrated the capabilities of modern forensic science and investigative techniques. DNA analysis, CCTV tracking, phone data, and informant testimony all played crucial roles in bringing some of those responsible to justice. But it also highlighted the limitations of the criminal justice system. The man who killed Keane was never prosecuted. Robbie Lawlor died before he could be brought to trial, and his death was itself the result of vigilante justice rather than legal process. Those who facilitated the murder received sentences that many felt did not reflect the severity of the crime. Stephen Carberry's trial was ongoing, but even if convicted, the sentences for aiding in body disposal are typically less severe than those for murder itself. For Garda, the case remained a priority. Investigators believed there were others involved, individuals who provided transportation, helped clean the crime scene, or had knowledge of the murder but did not come forward. The culture of silence that pervades organized crime makes prosecuting such individuals difficult, but detectives continued to pursue leads. The Drogheda feud itself continued, though at a reduced intensity, after the deaths of Robbie Lawlor and Cornelius Price. Both men had been central figures, and their removal created a power vacuum. Other criminals attempted to fill that void, but increased Garda presence and community pressure helped to suppress some of the violence. Still, the underlying issues, poverty, limited opportunity, the lucrative drugs trade, remained. As long as those conditions persist, the risk of young people like Keane being drawn into crime remains high. In the years since Keane's murder, his name has become synonymous with the human cost of gang violence. He is remembered not as a criminal, but as a teenager whose life was stolen by forces he may not have fully understood. His death serves as a reminder that behind every statistic, every headline about gang violence, there is a real person, a son, a friend, someone with dreams and potential. The flip-flops found in the sports bag with Keane's remains became a symbol of the absurdity and cruelty of gang culture. A petty theft from a gym bag escalated into torture and murder. A pair of flip-flops, items so trivial they might cost €10 in a shop, became the pretext for unspeakable violence. It speaks to a world where slights, real or imagined, are answered with lethal force, where reputation is maintained through fear, and where human life is expendable. Robbie Lawlor's own death just months after killing Keane illustrated the cyclical nature of violence. He killed out of revenge and to reassert control, only to be killed himself in a revenge plot orchestrated by someone who felt equally threatened. Cornelius Price, who arranged Lawlor's assassination, died not in a hail of bullets but from illness, a mundane end for a man who had orchestrated so much bloodshed. The irony was not lost on those who had tracked his career. The true crime documentary genre often focuses on the mechanics of how crimes are solved. But Keane's case also forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about society's failures. How did a 17-year-old boy end up in a situation where he could be murdered and dismembered? What systems failed to protect him? What interventions might have steered him away from gang involvement? These are questions without easy answers. Keane's connection to Owen Maguire, his godfather, placed him in a world where criminality was normalized. Family ties, loyalty, and the promise of respect all played roles in his descent. But there were also broader societal factors. The appeal of material success in an economy where legitimate opportunities felt out of reach, the glamorization of gang culture in music and media, and the lack of effective support systems for at-risk youth. Community organizations in Drogheda have worked tirelessly to provide alternatives for young people, offering sports programs, education initiatives, and mentorship. But these efforts are often underfunded and overstretched, competing against the immediate allure of gang life. The murder of Keane Mulready-Woods also highlighted the role of social media in modern gang culture. The video of Robbie Lawlor being attacked at the gym was shared widely, mocking him and contributing to his desire for revenge. After Lawlor's death, Cornelius Price's celebratory video circulated online, serving both as a boast and a warning. Social media allows gangs to broadcast their power and humiliate rivals, but it also creates evidence trails that investigators can use. Posts, videos, and messages that once might have been shared privately are now permanently archived, accessible to Garda with the right warrants. The investigation into Keane's murder also demonstrated the importance of international cooperation in tackling organized crime. Robbie Lawlor's assassination in Belfast required coordination between the Garda Síochána and the police service of Northern Ireland. Cross-border criminal networks necessitate cross-border law enforcement responses. But jurisdictional issues, differing legal systems, and resource constraints can complicate such efforts. The fact that Lawlor's killers have not yet been convicted, years after his death, speaks to those challenges. For those who study criminal psychology, Robbie Lawlor presents a particularly chilling profile. Described by Garda as someone who killed for fun, Lawlor displayed a level of violence that went beyond pragmatic criminality. The decision to dismember Keane's body and display it publicly was not necessary for the murder itself. It was an act of sadism and messaging. Psychologists who work with violent offenders note that such behavior often indicates a profound lack of empathy and a need for dominance. Lawlor's criminal career was marked by escalating violence, suggesting a trajectory that might have been interrupted with earlier intervention. But by the time of Keane's murder, Lawlor was beyond rehabilitation. His death, while preventing further killings, also meant that understanding his psychology became impossible. There would be no trial testimony, no psychiatric evaluation, no opportunity to examine what drove him to such extremes. The families of both Keane and Robbie Lawlor were also victims in different ways of the cycle of violence. Keane's family lost a son and brother in horrific circumstances. They endured the public spectacle of his murder, the graphic details revealed in court, and the inadequate sentences handed to those responsible. They continue to live in a community where gang violence remains a threat, where loyalty and silence often prevent justice. Robbie Lawlor's family, while perhaps less sympathetic given his crimes, also experienced loss. They too had to contend with a violent death, media scrutiny, and the knowledge that Lawlor's actions had made him a target. His children grew up without a father, And whatever his faults, that absence is felt. The collateral damage of gang violence extends in all directions, touching lives far beyond those directly involved. The Drogheda feud, like many gang conflicts, was ultimately about control of drug markets, territory, and reputation. But the cost of that control was measured in broken families, traumatized communities, and young lives lost. Keane Mulready-Woods' murder stands as one of the most brutal examples, but it was not an isolated incident. The feud claimed multiple lives, left others disabled or injured, and instilled fear across an entire town. Recovery for Drogheda has been slow. Community leaders continue to work toward healing, but the scars remain. For Garda, the case of Keane Mulready-Woods remains a reference point in understanding organized crime in Ireland. The investigation required coordination across multiple units, the use of advanced forensic techniques, and the cultivation of informants willing to risk their safety to provide information. It demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of the criminal justice system. Convictions were secured, but the mastermind of the murder escaped justice through death rather than prosecution. The case also underscored the importance of community engagement in crime prevention. In the aftermath of Keane's murder, there were renewed calls for investment in social programs, education, and opportunities for young people in areas affected by gang violence. Some of those calls were heeded, with additional funding allocated to youth services. But the underlying economic and social conditions that make gang life attractive remain largely unchanged. True crime documentaries often seek to find meaning or lessons in the stories they tell. In the case of Keane Mulready-Woods, the lesson is both simple and profound. Violence begets violence, and unchecked brutality consumes everyone it touches. Keane was drawn into a world that promised respect and belonging, but delivered only cruelty and death. Robbie Lawlor, the man who killed him, met the same fate just months later. Cornelius Price, who orchestrated Lawlor's assassination, died of illness before facing justice. The cycle continued, leaving behind grieving families and traumatized communities. The flip-flops, that strange and disturbing symbol found with Keane's remains, serve as a reminder of how trivial provocations can escalate into tragedy. A gym bag stolen in a moment of youthful bravado became the catalyst for a teenager's murder. It speaks to a culture where every slight, every insult demands a response, where backing down is seen as weakness and mercy is non-existent. Breaking that culture requires more than law enforcement. It requires addressing the root causes of gang involvement, providing alternatives, and creating a society where young people see a future beyond crime. As of now, the investigation into Keane's murder remains technically open. Garda continue to hope for additional arrests and further convictions related to the disposal of his body and other aspects of the crime. Witnesses who were reluctant to come forward initially may, over time, decide to cooperate. New evidence may emerge as forensic techniques improve, or as individuals involved in the crime feel the weight of conscience or fear of their own mortality. But for Keane's family, no amount of justice will bring him back. They live with the memory of a young man whose life was stolen, whose body was desecrated, and whose death became a public spectacle. They endure the knowledge that the man who killed him was never prosecuted, and that some of those who helped are already planning for their release. The story of Keane Mulready-Woods is not just a true crime narrative. It is a snapshot of a society grappling with organized crime, a community struggling to protect its young, and a justice system trying to hold individuals accountable in a world governed by fear and silence. It is a story that raises more questions than it answers, that offers no easy solutions, and that reminds us of the human cost hidden behind headlines and statistics. In the years to come, Keane's name will likely fade from the headlines. The trials will conclude, the sentences will be served, and new crimes will capture the public's attention. But for those who knew him, and for those who study the patterns of gang violence in Ireland, his death will remain a stark reminder of what happens when brutality is left unchecked, when young lives are treated as expendable, and when revenge becomes the governing principle of a community. The legacy of Keane Mulready-Woods is one of loss and warning. It challenges us to do better, to intervene earlier, and to create a society where no 17-year-old finds themselves on the path he walked. Whether that challenge will be met remains to be seen. What is certain is that the cycle of violence he became part of continues, and until the underlying conditions change, more young people will be drawn into the same deadly world that claimed Keane's life. This is the chilling true story of Keane Mulready-Woods, a story of dark history, criminal psychology, and a crime investigation that exposed the brutal reality of Ireland's gang underworld.